My father went to Saudi Arabia in 1937. He was one of the first dozen geologists to go into Saudi Arabia and see what they had in their concession, within the concession. And he landed in Saudi Arabia. He didn't know anything about Saudi Arabia, barely knew where it was. Took a motor launch from Dhahran over to Al-Khobar. First thing he saw was the camp. That afternoon, he came back, went to Al-Khobar, and there were 2 giant tents and about 5,000 Arabs with knives and guns and rifles and swords and all kinds of tribal weapons. The occasion was the visit of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Saud bin Abdulaziz, and he had come to meet the Sheikh of Bahrain. The political significance was that the Sheikh of Bahrain was already pumping oil, and that Abdulaziz and his son Saud hoped that soon they would be pumping oil, but by then, still, they didn't have any oil. They had drilled something like 10 dry wells, and they were losing faith. They had one more well in production, well, not in production, they were drilling it, and basically, if they didn't find any oil, they were going to close down the concession. So my father arrived, and about a week later, he went into the desert for 3-4 months, lived with the 15 Bedouin. He really got to know Bedouins and Arabs, and they had nothing to do except run around and then all night long talk around campfires and that kind of thing. And so my father real quickly learned Arabic and got to know these men, and he thought it was terrific because they weren't changed. I mean, these men, except for gunpowder and raw sugar, they were living like Moses lived. And I tell you all this because that's where my father figured out what was going on in Saudi Arabia. And he was a junior geologist at the time, and later in his career, he rose higher and higher until eventually he was the CEO. But throughout the whole process, he always knew who those Saudis were. They were not foreign people. They were real people that he knew heart to heart. And I think that's what distinguished his whole career, was whenever there was a conflict between an employee, a Saudi employee, and the company, 99% of the time, my dad went with the Saudi Arab because he understood what they were trying to do. So while he was doing that, I was growing up. When I was about 6, I think Dhahran probably went to 10th Street then. And after that was nothing between Dhahran and Al-Khobar. And there was no fence. And you'd wake up in the morning and jackals would be roaming through town. And I mean, it was pretty wild. But as a kid, it was absolutely terrific because you were just out the door and gone into the desert and with all your buddies and get into all kinds of trouble and run around. And it was fantastic.